I'm Liz Kerin, and my book Night's Edge is a story about a girl and her mom. It's a story about codependent families, addiction, coming of age. It is also a story about vampires. It follows a young woman named Mia whose mother was turned into a vampire when she was 10 years old, and she has to find a way to protect her from the outside world and keep her from harming their community, harming herself. And so she starts giving of her own blood to keep her mom safe. Flash forward 13 years, Mia's 23 and she's still doing it. But she and her mom start to wonder, if there's more to life outside of what they've built. And that is where all of the bloody trouble begins.
I'm going to start out in a way that I don't think I've had the opportunity to when I'm interviewing an author about. So we're talking about, Night's Edge. And I'm not going to start out by talking about Night's Edge because when I was looking at your, Amazon, profile and stuff like that, I was like, oh, there's already another book that she's got in the future. And I clicked on it because I was interested because I enjoyed Night's Edge. And I was like, well, I'll obviously read whatever that is. And it's a sequel. So that's where I'm starting. I'm not starting. We'll get into the actual story, but I was excited to see after just finishing reading the book and enjoying it that there's more to come. So was that originally planned, or is that a happy kind of thing that happened after the original story was made?
It was a happy thing that happened after I wrote the original manuscript. I truly intended Night's Edge to be a standalone. And when I met Kelly, my editor over at Nightfire, and we decided we were going to work together, one of the first things she asked me was about a door I left open at the end of Night's Edge. Literally and figuratively, because now you've read the whole thing. But like and it was unintentional. And she was like, "Are we doing a sequel? Because this, and this." Also, I'm going to try to be spoiler free as much as
Yeah.
possible with you. And I was like, I didn't plan on that, but now that we're talking about it, oh my God. And it just spun out immediately. And then, we did a 2-book deal so that we could do a sequel. And then I just started writing it, and I'm so excited that we have this sequel. I'm just thrilled that I got to write it, and I had so much fun. And I feel like it's a satisfying conclusion for these characters that I never intended. And I'm just really happy it exists.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're looking at least for the moment, like a duology situation.
It's definitely a duology. I feel like I've wrapped it up. You'll get to the end of the sequel and you'll be like, yeah, it's tied up. So,
Gotcha.
but I love that we got that opportunity.
So it's funny that you bring that up. So a few years back, I was talking to Josh Mallerman, and we were talking about Mallory, which is a sequel to his book Bird Box. And he said that the inspiration or how he got the idea to do that book was he was watching the movie. And at the end of the movie, he said to his fiancée, well, I wonder what happens now. And she's like, it's your story. So he was so caught up in the other person's like story that, they took from his thing that he didn't see it as his own thing. He saw it as like, now I'm a fan who's curious about what comes next. So sometimes it takes a
That's
little push
really
from the outside,
interesting.
I think.
Yeah, I was, really, really absorbed in the action of Night's Edge and just, reverse engineering to that ending. And just, it was this jewel box of an experience. And that was it. Yeah. Couldn't see beyond that until somebody tapped me on the shoulder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was very cool. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy that it worked out that way because I really enjoyed Night's Edge. So it's
Thank
nice to
you.
know that we'll be seeing more of the characters and stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Night's Edge is not it's not shy about being a vampire novel. And I know this is probably kind of a basic, boring question, but like I can see two possibilities. Either you've been fascinated with the idea of vampires and so wanted to do something in that realm, or it just fit the story you were trying to tell. So, or maybe a third option I didn't just mention. So, what's your level of vampire interest?
I never intended to write a vampire book. Nobody was asking for one. But here it is. I truly, I had certain themes and characters I was really interested in exploring. And, they kind of say writers write the same story over and over again until they process whatever it is they're trying to process. And that's been me writing for the past 10 years, writing about mothers and daughters and coming of age and things like that. But I love genre, and I've done sci-fi, I've done fantasy, and I love horror. But I was never like a vampire kid.
Mhm.
I loved, I saw Interview with the Vampire, read a couple Anne Rice books growing up, obviously. Um, Loved Let the Right One In. That was one of my favorite horror films when
Yeah.
I was like when did that come out? I was like a teenager. But I like missed the Twilight phenomenon. I was like slightly too old when it all came about. And I was
Yeah.
like, nah, none of this. So like vampires to me were not my jam, not my thing. Um, but when I don't know, this just popped into my head maybe like 10 years ago. I realized, I was processing um some of my own childhood memories and making peace with some things like you do when you get perspective as an adult. And was just, I don't know, it came to me that mourning my lost youth and thinking about what I gave up when I was younger felt like giving of my lifeblood.
Okay.
And, Mia in this story is literally giving of her blood to protect her mom and keep their secret safe. And boy, if that didn't just spin out completely from there. And now we have Night's Edge, and it's a vampire book,
Yeah.
unapologetically. Although I will say I've been really impressed with Nightfire's marketing on it, where they're kind of being a little coy in some of the synopses and in the cover art and what have you. And even in the title, which we had changed, and that's another story. But everything is a little bit under the radar vampire. It's not
Mhm.
totally blood and guts and tall, dark strangers wearing capes.
Yeah, I now that you say that, I have noticed that. Like even so, the cover image, which I don't have in front of me to look at, but seems very like ambiguous, like dark, and like obviously something wrong may be going on, but not necessarily pointing to a specific reason or like source for danger or whatever. So yeah, I'll agree with that.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, the giving the blood thing would definitely be an apt analogy. So that definitely makes sense. But talking about the thing you mentioned, which was like, uh, I have an interesting observation because when I read this, I was pulling themes in my head. I always like to look at what themes are going on in the story, and for me, it was definitely like a really strained family dynamic, and like there was, a problematic situation, and I can go into further what I was thinking about it, but like reading other people talk about it, it's definitely called out as like a very specifically mother daughter dynamic, which I can't have. So, um, to me, what I was pulling from it was, like you said, like giving up something of yourself, and in the process, you lose um, your ability to be like a normal kid, or like so. That's kind of basically what happens in this. Something bad happens in the beginning, and then Mia, the main character, then has basically ostensibly no choice but to kind of give up a lot of her individuality and freedom in order to kind of maintain a normal, try to be as normal in this thing as possible. So, um, what was interesting for me is I can't pull a mother daughter from my own personal experience. So I'm totally interested in hearing, was it specifically written as a mother daughter thing, or was it just like a strained family dynamic type of situation?
Yeah, for me, it always was going to be mothers and daughters because, that's kind of like I was saying before, the story I keep writing till I can't write it anymore. Maybe I've done it. Maybe it's out of my system now, at last. But yeah, just for me, um, I grew up with a family dynamic where there were a lot of things I wasn't able to know about my mother and longed to connect with. So for me, this is a bit of a tangent, but I just finished reading White Horse by Erica Worth, really beautiful, dark book about the unknowable mother. And, I really connected with that. So for me, I didn't see any other way to tell this story than to have it be mothers and daughters. I'm also fascinated by um, this idea that, so now I'm getting older, and the things I do know about my mom, um, I'm seeing them in myself now. And I think it's really interesting that, like, as daughters grow up, they can be a lot like their mom for better or worse, and we usually fight against it as we're coming of age and want to have our own autonomy.
Hmm.
But some stuff just doesn't come out in the wash, and it's for better or worse, and it's really, I don't know, just deeply interesting. And the way mothers also impress upon their daughters lost dreams, expectations. um, it's a dynamic that's just very fertile and rich, and I don't know, I think it's a bottomless well to draw from.
Sure. And now that you said that, something comes to mind, which is that the book is written in a first person kind of situation. So we're really seeing the whole story from Mia's perspective. Was that always the plan, or was there ever an attempt to like kind of show things directly from her mom Izzy's perspective? Or am I could be getting something wrong, but that's kind of just a general thought that came to mind.
Yeah, I think for this book, I wanted it to be squarely in Mia's point of view. I wanted to experience her memories through the eyes of a child who's confused but needs to take action. And then, as a young adult who's trying to find her footing in the world, I thought it was really important to stay really tight in her POV. That being said, I eventually, and this is, not in the sequel and not in Night's Edge, but there's a standalone short story I did write from Izzy's POV about what happened in the weeks leading up to her getting this disease, and how her
Mm,
life changed, and how she knows she messed up, but there was nothing she could do. And that maybe in a way she kind of wanted it, and it's very complicated and very, a lot of gray area. And so for me, writing that, and I still haven't decided what we're doing with it. Are we putting it out there between sequel and
yeah.
the first one? I don't know, but it exists, and I did explore what Izzy's side of the story was. I just don't know what we're going to do with it. But now I have admitted to you out loud that it exists, so maybe I have to do something with it.
Well, yeah, we'll see. That would be cool to see. But I think that what you did by making it fully from Mia's perspective is created a kind of an ability for the reader to have ambiguity about whether Mia's mom is like not a good person,
Right.
or has made mistakes that have caused a bad situation. Like there's, and I think that might even kind of, it feels like I'm in Mia's perspective, not really knowing 100%, but wanting to believe the best of someone. So I feel like narrowing it down to Mia's perspective really kind of made it feel more like I was feeling Mia's feelings, maybe.
Yeah, and that helps me write it as well. I love writing in first person. It just helps me connect really deeply. I think a lot of writers feel that way too. And I think what you just said is really interesting. Is he not a good person, or is she just responding to circumstance? Is it a little bit of both? And I
Mm.
think that that's how we view our parents sometimes. When they do something that hurts us, when they do something that is confusing, we as their children can never, it's very hard to say my parent is a bad person. It's very complicated. So I appreciate that you pulled that out thematically.
Yeah. Well, you made it possible for me to feel that, so I have to give you the credit. But so yeah, and that's it's interesting because so my going into a little personal thing, my father and my parents divorced when I was like less than 2 years old, and he moved to Alaska. So I was living in Illinois, and he
Oh
moved to
no.
Alaska.
Wow.
Didn't see him until I was a teenager. Didn't really have a lot of
Mm,
contact, and so even when he tried to, kind of rekindle a family relationship, he was not good at it. And so, for me, there's it's easy to see these betrayals as, or these actions as betrayals, I should say.
yeah.
That it was an intentional thing to make me feel bad. It's easy for me to feel that way. Um, but um, then seeing people in his life that were, in his day to day life that loved him and had great things to say about him, I was like, oh, he's a good person. But I didn't have that evidence until he was gone. So it's like tapping into something that I think about from time to time. And people will tell you I have a really hard time letting go of anger with a a parent, because I think sometimes not even having closure kind of makes the door harder to close on something like that. But um, yeah, I think we all, to some degree, whether our relationships were good or terrible with a parent, because you can't know them the way they know themselves, there's always going to be that ambiguity of like, I don't fully know this person, maybe.
Yeah, and that ambiguity becomes really, for me anyway, becomes more powerful the older you get and the more you become an adult. And you're like, I knew my parent the way a child knows their parent.
Yeah.
Um, and that anger comes from a place of wishing things had been better, things had been different because you wanted to love them. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. And thank you for sharing with me, where you were coming from. Yeah, it's hard stuff. And that's why I think every time I have a conversation about Night's Edge, whether that's with like having a great interview with someone like you or an editor or, someone else I'm working with, we always kind of open up. It makes you
Yeah.
talk about your family. It makes you talk about your coming of age. Whether you want to or not, it ends up happening. And I'm here for it.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I talked to someone recently, author Adam Godfrey, who had a book called Narcissus come out just recently as a novella. And one of the things we talked about was like kind of the reason he wrote that story, and he said he just wanted to give readers an entertaining thing to read. So there wasn't necessarily like a deeper meaning or exploration to it. It was just a fascinating tale that he wanted to tell, um, and so it was great and it was fun. It was entertaining, and I really enjoyed it. But like I feel that I identify more with the stories that make you think about stuff and make you feel a feeling that maybe you wouldn't otherwise if you haven't read that. So yeah, I definitely identify more with stuff like this where there is kind of more to explore. But Narcissus was fantastic. I'm not knocking that at all.
Yeah, no, no, completely. And by the way, like the book I wrote before Night's Edge was something that I was just like, this is fun. This is a dark adventure. This is entertaining. This is sexy. This is scary. Like sometimes you write for those reasons
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful, fun escape. So very different experiences, both very fulfilling. So there's room for all of it.
I like that there's going to be more to the story down the road where um, in the description, I don't think that the description of the second book really spoils anything, but it one of the things that jumped out to me was that Mia is now kind of faced with the idea that maybe she's more like her mom than she thought. And
Mhm.
having read Night's Edge, I was like, ooh, this will be interesting to see how that kind of exploration goes down.
Yeah. So, I mean, that for me was the major theme of the second book is how are we like our parents and how are we not like our parents? And where is that space for forgiveness between the edges of your pain, is there any?
Hmm.
These are all great, powerful questions that, I feel like I ask in my own life really frequently, and it was time to try to unpack them. And what better way to unpack them than tell a weird little vampire story? So that's where we're
Yeah.
at.
Lightening things up a little bit, though, I'd like to comment about a couple of the characters. So Mia's the protagonist, and Mia is, well, we haven't really talked about the way that the story is told, but it's told when Mia is 10, and then when Mia is in her early 20s, like 23 years old or whatever. So it's kind
Yeah,
of a
23.
back and forth. It jumps back and forth between those ages. And then but in the early 20s age, 23, she meets Jade, who is I'm trying to think of the best way to describe her. Very effervescent. Like if I had to describe her as a color, she'd be very neon. Like there's just a lot
Yeah,
of energy
totally.
there.
Yeah.
And so tonally in the book, I feel like um, even Mia's general personality, but also Jade definitely bring kind of a lightness and a little bit of fun and quirkiness to the story, contrasting a bit of the kind of the darker stuff that's in there. So I don't even know if there's a question there, but Jade seems like almost written like it's someone you know or someone you'd like to
Mhm.
know. So was there a genesis for that character, or was it just nice to give Mia someone like that in her life, which is a little bit different?
I mean, you want the best for Mia. You want her to meet somebody who vibes with her, who makes her feel special and sparkly and happy. And Jade is all of those things. And I, found myself wanting that for her. And I'm like, I need this character to be the most fun and for it to truly just be like this awesome siren song that Mia can't resist and shouldn't. I wanted it to not,
Yes.
because what's going on for Izzy is like her mom is getting into a very dangerous negative relationship at the same time. So that's over there, and we'll talk about
Mhm.
that. But like, I wanted Jade to be a foil for that and to just glow where there was shadows over there.
Yeah.
So it was very intentional to have her be very fun loving. And I think it's part of why, for me, the book was enjoyable to write because I could kind of come up for air when I did scenes with the two of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Like you are kind of coming up for air. But it also introduces the possibility of examining a childhood that was stunted or kind of atrophied or whatever because of the bad situation that the character was in. Um, Now you've got a person who's an adult who maybe hasn't had a lot of the experiences that someone her age would have, and now has to she's looking at it from her perspective. I felt very much like, oh, we're at a disadvantage in this. She wasn't like unable to interact with people, but definitely some kinds of relationships seems like it was like she was less experienced with. So um,
Mm-hmm.
having Jade around kind of gave us the opportunity to see like what happens in these situations where suddenly like I get to have a deeper friendship or romantic thing than I've had an ability to have in the past because it's been strictly forbidden. So I feel like Jade's character really opened the door for exploring that kind of pain, anxiety, elation, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that the dynamic Mia and her mom have is just built on a foundation of fear that Mia didn't have friends come over growing up, like don't, if your mom's a vampire, like probably don't invite a friend over after school. You want to really lock it down. And then dating was just a non-starter because, you just don't want to let anybody into your life. And she and her mom kind of had this like weird vow of celibacy, and it's very strange. But I think what's also going on for Mia, and this is very real, I think for any kids who've had trauma growing up, that like the Peter Pan syndrome of it all, is a factor,
Hmm.
where Mia's 23, but I think emotionally she's much younger than that, because sexually she's stunted. She's stuck at the age of like 10, 11, 12 when all of this terrible stuff started happening and her mom
Hmm.
got turned. So I think that, like, how dare she grow up? And she can't really grow up because, like, it would endanger their situation. Like, there's a part earlier in the book where Mia talks about, like, oh, I wasn't really allowed to wear makeup when I was in high school because it made me look older than my mom. And, like, we can't have
Right.
that, because then
Yeah.
people are going to know what she is. And, constantly having to downplay your maturity and that you're growing up and that you're sexual and that you're an adult person because you have to pretend to be younger than your mom. So that was a really interesting thing to unpack. So I think there were questions I asked myself during the writing process of, like, has Mia seriously never been kissed? Has she seriously never examined, like, her sexuality? So, like, I talk about how she had a crush at one point, but, like, didn't understand that's what it was. She's not totally closed off,
Right.
but she wasn't allowed to explore it, and wouldn't wouldn't dare go against her mother or put her in danger. So that's why this thing is the way it is.
Yeah, and actually, now that you said all that, it brings to mind an interesting contrast because at the very beginning of the book, her mom literally says to her, I need you to be the adult.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect of it where it's like you need to be responsible. You have to think about all these important things and you have to like have rules that govern your life and everything that, usually we would leave to someone who's mature and, not 10.
Yeah.
Um, in contrast with the fact that like she can't do that on the other side. So it's like a damned if you do kind of situation.
Totally, totally. Someone like Mia is expected to be so mature, so responsible, but also never grow up and have autonomy.
Yeah.
What do you do? Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool stuff to think about.
It's and again, I think that's why the Jade of it all is just a lovely counterpoint and enjoyable for me to write and hopefully enjoyable to read. Because you want that for her. You want her to branch out.
Yeah. And I will have to say that it was, I don't think this is going to sound weird, but it was enjoyable to see those awkward moments where Mia just didn't know what to do, where she was just totally flummoxed and like, um, just kind of panicky because like she was just experiencing things she hadn't done before. So
Mm-hmm.
that was neat in its own way too.
Thanks.
um, we talked about that it's a vampire thing, but there is like, and it's kind of your own take or flavor on vampires existing. So a couple of things that were interesting were that it's a world where vampires are known publicly, and so there's like the public impact of that, and like it's a known threat that is needs to be dealt with. But there's also like just a teasing of history of where this all started, kind of like a patient zero. So was that fun to come up with, or was that inspired by anything, or was that just straight from the imagination?
That was, yeah, it was fun to come up with. What was kind of interesting was I had all of the emotional mechanics of these characters figured out a while ago, but was really struggling with some of the world building and some of the realism that I was, like, trying to capture here, because I, wanted to do something that felt really grounded and character driven, and so wanted the world to emulate that, sense of reality. And I was having trouble threading the needle until we had a pandemic. I don't know if you heard. And
Oh yeah.
so during 2020 was, stuck at home reading terrifying things on the internet and all this misinformation and just how political things got and how unstable everything felt, and being just stuck thinking about diseases all the time. A lot of things crystallized during that year. And so thinking about how this is truly a disease, and not a pandemic in the way that, like, COVID was spread. You sneeze and you might get it on an airplane. Saratov syndrome, which is what we are calling the vampire disease in our book, and the vampires are called Saras. you catch this because someone comes after you with intention. And that makes for a very sinister pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Someone wants to turn you and take you on. And, you know, that that leads to a lot of dramatically rich situations. And so I really was fascinated by the show Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
the way they unspooled all of that secrecy and how dramatic it was. I loved the way that was conveyed. And so I was definitely inspired by that whole history and scenario with Saratov syndrome, how it comes from this little town in the USSR in the late 80s and this weird little family that like had this thing happen. And
Yeah.
I mean, people will just have to read the book and hear more about it. But it was fun to, let me put it this way, the pandemic wasn't fun for anybody anywhere, but it was entertaining in its own dark, twisty way to conceive of a mythological disease at that time.
That's awesome. And I dance around the idea of mentioning overtly the pandemic in relation to stories that are, contemporary
Yeah.
because, well, I was talking to Zoya Stage and people were giving her a hard time about her book Mothered because it was very obviously a pandemic situated story. But yours obviously is not. And so, it's not it's a part, it's a mechanic of the story, but it's not something that's like right in your face. But
Yeah.
what was cool for me was we have all experienced this kind of global trauma that we all need to process. Um, and so reading stories that are, that kind of evoke some of the feelings we went through can be a good thing. They can be something where it helps us be like, oh, you know, um, maybe put to bed some of the thoughts that we had about it, or the problems that we had going through it. So I like when stories kind of add that realism, or those aspects of it, because it is something I like to think about, and it's very unique in generationally. I think it's very unique. It hasn't happened in a long time, so um, I think it's just a matter of like how does one approach it. And so far, all the books that I've read that incorporate it in one way or another have done a great job of like making it something where it's like um, uh, not exploitative or whatever. Like it's just it's an element that we can think about. I know I'm talking way too long about this, but it's an element that we can
No, but
think about.
I hear you. Yeah. It's kind of interesting how like a pandemic situation fictionally has stopped feeling as fictional as maybe it once did.
Yeah,
Like, there's a reason The Last of Us was such a huge show. And I think it had, because they were nervous about putting that out, being like, this is a pandemic show. I don't know. Like, there was something to tether you to it emotionally that maybe 10 years ago would have felt really different, because this thing that has been viewed as a fictional apocalyptic story nugget
yeah,
actually happened to us. And
right,
so all bets are off now. And I honestly think, like, I was, thinking about what you were saying about Mothered and how it's I don't like the idea that something is a pandemic story.
yeah,
Like, everything's a pandemic story now. It's this worldwide crisis we all went through together, and it altered our culture. So how is everything not, it's not as niche
yep.
as I think people want to believe. So that's my take on it. There are no pandemic stories. Everything's a pandemic
Every
story.
I agree, and like I have some thoughts about publishing and how publishing's great because it gives me the books that I read and love. And so like, I need people to publish things, but at the same time, um, I've seen brilliance just, get stepped on because of like the whimsical nature of, an audience. So, There's that side of it too. But anyway, I don't want to get too serious about that. But you're absolutely right. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but really everything is, there's no way you can write something that doesn't somehow even like subconsciously reflect the stuff that we went through. So yeah,
Mhm.
I agree with you there. Yeah. Um, so that's interesting that Chernobyl was one of the reasons, because I thought um, that show was awesome. And
So
I
good.
really enjoyed it. Then I found out there was like the companion podcast. So I listened to that and like got to hear all
Oh
like
yeah.
the, from the creator's perspective and everything. But it is very rich with what you said, which is the government denial, how they mishandled stuff, and how something that if people just made the right choice could have been stopped turned into something much bigger and much more deadly. And so it's very apt that that would be something that you drew inspiration from.
Yeah. Yeah. Chernobyl was so good. Yeah. Not the inspiration that people were thinking I was going to pull out, but yeah.
Well, it's always interesting where an idea comes from, because it doesn't seem like it's very necessarily a straight line. I still
Never
love
is.
uh, Stephen Graham Jones was talking about his book My Heart is a Chainsaw, and I believe, and I could be misquoting or misremembering, but when he was asked where the story came from, he was talking about how he was reading The Virgin Suicides and liked the way the story was told, and that was the inspiration for telling a story. It just ended up being a lot more murdery and stuff.
Yeah,
So who knows where an idea is going to originate. So, but that's why I love
truly.
doing this too, because I get to talk about
Yeah.
it.
Some of my favorite reads, I mean, obviously I love horror, I love sci-fi, I love genre, but like I love reading memoirs. I love reading. So some of my favorite books, coming of age stories. I loved In the Dream House and my I'm Glad My Mom Died and The Glass Castle. All really sad memoirs about coming of age, abusive relationships, all this stuff. And so because that is something I gravitate towards as a reader, it made sense to me, kind of in terms of what you were talking about with where does an idea even come from? Where
Yeah.
does um where do you draw inspiration? It's like writing Night's Edge as if it were a memoir was was the key for me. Where I wanted it to read like that and feel like that, but you knew you weren't reading a memoir because it's about vampires.
Yeah.
And something that has been so cool, and now I'm allowed to talk about this, is that the audiobook narrator for this is this incredible actress, Chase Sweet Wonders, who was in the movie Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. She's in the show Buck Kiss right now, and she's incredible. And the way she narrates this book, to me, it's as if she's on stage at the Moth, where she's just talking about this crazy thing that happened to her when she was a kid, and she's so
Hmm.
natural. It gives it that texture of a memoir that I wanted so badly. So when I first heard her read the first couple chapters, my mouth just hung agape. I was like, it's this. It sounds like this. It's perfect. Everyone should go
Yeah.
listen to her audiobook. It's unreal.
That's awesome. I have to imagine that it's definitely gratifying when, as an author, when you get, the audiobook seems like the people doing the audiobook really get it or like really represent it the way you want. So that's got to be really either a relief or satisfying.
Both, yeah, definitely both. If it's a relief first, and then you're like, oh, but I also just love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very happy.
So one thing you mentioned just now brought to mind something that I was thinking it would make sense to talk about. So you said writing it like a memoir, and so it being written the way it is not crazy dialogue heavy. It's a lot of Mia telling you what happened or what is
Hmm.
happening, and so um, one of the effects that had on me is like I felt kind of like the claustrophobia of her situation.
Hmm.
So it had a good emotional effect on me. Like I very much felt like these things were happening to me. But then looking into kind of you in general, I think, in various places, screenwriting is something that you're listed as being, you're a screenwriter.
Hmm.
So, and I'm not an author, and I've never written anything for film or TV or anything like that. But screenwriting to me is it's action and dialogue. So it seems
Yeah.
kind of very different than the way that this book is laid out. So, was there any problem there, or are you just, or am I way off base, or is that something that it's easy for you to do kind of either way?
Um, it's easy for me to do either way, but it wasn't easy for this. There's there's a I kind of partition my brain really clearly between I'm writing a film, I'm writing an episode of television, I'm writing a book, and kind of they don't always meet in the middle, but so it wasn't this what writing the book wasn't challenging. Like I really like going in really deep into a character's mind and going on that ride with them, which is something you don't really do on television because it's so external. But as you might have seen on the internet, we are developing a Night's Edge television show. I have been writing that pilot, and externalizing all of this internal stuff has been an incredible challenge. It's going great. We got
Yeah,
it, but like it took some time, and
yeah,
we had to kind of crack the bones a little bit and see what was in them and then reassemble the skeleton. Um, it was really interesting because, again, like you've been saying, the book is just so in her head, such a little tight jewel box that in order for the whole setup to make sense and for the audience to understand how they got here and why she's like this, we had to create situations to externalize a lot of what's internal in this book. Um,
yeah,
and I thought it was going to be easy. I'm like, I know these characters. I know what's up. No, it was really hard.
yeah.
So it's been a super interesting experience doing that.
Well, yeah, that was going to be a topic that I led into because that is exciting, and it's nice that you get to be a part of it.
Yeah,
The writing, the development of it. Do you think that? So I will say that the book read pretty cinematically. Like there's books that it's easy to envision like vividly, kind of in your head what's going on, whereas some other ones it's not as it's not that way. So is being a screenwriter helpful in kind of writing in a more visual, cinematic kind of way for your novels?
definitely. I went to NYU Film School. I did dramatic writing at Tisch. And the one thing they drill into you from like day one is just the structure, the three acts, or if you're doing television, the five acts, and just building the action and the denouement and like all the ways that those mechanics make for a satisfying journey with a character. And so that's just like part of my DNA as a writer since I was like 18 years old and started doing it.
Hmm.
So writing books, I find that I outline them and I break them like a movie. And I did that with my first book, Phantom Forest, as well. I had that in my head, like this is three acts of a movie. It goes here, it goes here, it goes here. Um, and so Night's Edge was the same way, but broke form a little bit because I was playing with the nonlinear timeline and her flashbacks and everything. But
Hmm.
same idea. You're building to, again, trying to be spoiler free here, but you're building to this big event at the end of Night's Edge with Jade and Mia and Devin and Izzy, and it all kind of like everyone's in each other's crosshairs, and what's coming,
Yeah,
and it yeah. So and then I reverse engineered what that big ending is, and kind of just I structured it like a movie.
good. Yeah. Um, and then one of the things that this is just a random thought because we haven't talked about Devin. Devin, we're saying Devin,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Hmm.
I always worry. There's this thing my girlfriend talks about all the time where um, people will mispronounce words, and she doesn't see it as like people not knowing how to like not understanding the word. It's just that they've only read it, never said it, kind of thing. And so,
Yeah, that's like when I was a little kid and read Harry Potter and I was saying Hermione And then I
Right.
heard someone say Hermione for the first time, and I was like, oh, obviously it's Hermione. How the hell
Yeah.
was I saying that in my head? Same thing.
But
Yeah.
she kind of takes it as a
Devin's
badge of
also a funny
honor.
name because it's also a girl's name and it can be said like several different ways.
Yeah.
But no.
I went to school with a male Devin, so
I
but
did
yeah, she
too.
takes it as a badge of honor that like if you mispronounce words because you read a lot, that's nice because you're reading a lot, and that's a good thing. So I like that spin.
I like that.
So I'll never be apologetic if I say something wrong if I read it somewhere because our minds kind of receive those as we will.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things I liked about Devin as a character was I always like kind of a bad guy who's more referred to than present. Like
Yeah.
maybe like the thought of, not the thought of, but like uh I guess I just said it the right way the first time, but like they're not always there, but they are like a threat in the story. And I can give examples of other books that do that very well. But uh I wonder if that's changing with the next book, or is that not something we want to go into?
I can go into it a little bit. Yeah, well, that was actually part of the challenge of writing the second one is that like in the first one, yeah, the looming threat of him is very present, but he is not physically present
Right.
very much. He exists in her memories. And memories are tricky, especially when you're a child. And so, what I'm playing with in the sequel is like, what do you really remember about this person? What really happened that day? What is he telling you happened that day?
Yep.
What is in your mind? Like, do you just remember him the way you remember the scary parts of a movie you once watched? Like,
Right.
you watched this person through your fingers. Um, the idea of him is scary, but who is he really? And so for me as the writer, that took a while for me to figure out because he's in it. He's in the sequel a lot more than the first one, but it takes some time to get to that. Is all I'm going to say. Yeah, and I had to find his voice and like put him in more scenes and be like, wait, who even is this guy? Hold on, what is he doing? And
Well,
that was fun and dark and creepy, and I'm really excited actually for people to get to know that character better in the next one.
I think that now that you say it like that, I think it's cool that it was more of a legend or an impression of the person as opposed to the actual person, because it allows for that discovery. If we just saw him black and white in the first book, you wouldn't have as much place to kind of maybe examine or explore than if like the situation where it is, where he's more of like a looming presence than an actual presence. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's the boogeyman,
Yeah.
and it's like, and then something we talk about a lot in this overarching story is like, well, who is the villain? Is it her mother or is it him? And I'm like, why not both
Mhm.
for different reasons? So yeah.
That's cool. Going back toward talking about the television series, a couple of thoughts come to mind. First of all, I'm assuming this is kind of like in early stages of like production or pre-production. Um, so you might not necessarily know when an actual show would manifest. Is that kind of accurate? Or
Yeah, well, as you might have heard, the Writers Guild went on strike a week ago.
oh, that's
So we're
right.
not allowed to
Yeah.
come to work. And we are fighting for our rights. So there is a script. The script is done. The
Mhm.
script was turned in the wee hours before that writer's strike started. Um, so we're just waiting for more news. And,
Yeah.
I expect that, the strike is going to upend a lot of plans that might have been in progress. So I'm in limbo as much as anybody else is. And I will hopefully be among the first to know if we're moving ahead. But, did get to write a script and spent the past like 2 years developing it really. And it's been, like I said, it's been a journey. It's been a treat. And I met some incredible people during the whole
Yeah.
process. And so even if we don't go any further, if the gods of television don't smile upon us, I'm really glad it happened.
I don't know why I didn't even think of that, because I was even like on your social media, just kind of looking at kind of recent things, and I saw you posting about the strike. So don't know why that didn't occur to me to, incorporate that in my thoughts about it. But,
No, I mean, people don't, well, television is so funny the way development works. Like, we only just announced that this show, that the development of the show even exists, like
yeah,
a couple of weeks ago, when it's been dominating my life for the past year. So it's hilarious how people think this just started, and I'm like, no, it's
yeah.
been going. So really, like, it's a totally, relevant question to ask. Where is it at? What are you doing? For all you know, we've been shooting it.
Mm.
um, no one really knows. It's a mystery. Even I don't know.
Yeah. Um, well, so before I get to my second question about the show, then what's the best way people can support the writers, like who aren't, writers in the Writers Guild and everything? What is there something people can do to support the writers other than just say, hey, like bring attention to it?
I mean, bringing attention to it is obviously super important, especially when it comes to the issue of AI, which was
Yeah.
one of the key points that was not addressed in our negotiations and is really troubling. And we want everyone to be speaking out if they don't want, if they don't want the finale of Succession to be written by a robot. Like,
Yeah.
please tell everyone that you don't want that. Make it known. Another thing that people can do to support the writers, there is a fund called the Entertainment Community Fund, formerly known as the Actors Fund. So now it's for all of entertainment. And it exists to help working artists whose families are impacted by something like a strike. And that exists. You can Google it. You can, donate a couple of bucks. There's, not everybody's diving into piles of money like Scrooge McDuck over here.
Yeah.
Like, there are working writers I know who have two other day jobs, who are bartenders, who are babysitters, dog walkers, like, and that's part of the reason we're striking is,
Mhm.
we're being squeezed for every dime, and these are working class artists.
Yep. Well, obviously, I'm fully in support of, and I'll put that in the notes, my Substack, post for this, so
Cool,
that
thanks.
people can have
Mm-hmm.
access to that. Whoever listens to this, and the AI thing. So my girlfriend is a copywriter, and so
Okay.
when stuff like Chat GPT manifested, it was an instant source of like a ton of anxiety, because it has the potential to destabilize or replace, certain positions, and there's people whose livelihoods depend on that. So I, not from your specific perspective, but from, related perspectives, have heard a lot about that lately. So um yeah, it's
Yeah, it's
definitely,
it's going to impact other industries, not just entertainment, not just, advertising. God, it's really destabilizing. Yeah, that's
yeah,
the right word for it.
yep. um so yeah, I take it very seriously, and I really honestly should, be more read about stuff, like, so that I'm more aware of the deal. But there's like a cybersecurity podcast I listen to, and hearing people from the cybersecurity side of things talk about how it's kind of an issue, or because like it could be even coding, like you could have programs generate code and stuff, and how that could be like for malware. So yeah, it is kind of a ubiquitous threat that people don't really see, I think, as big as it is. So the AI
Right.
part of it,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think I empathize a little bit. I think I'm safe, but who knows?
Who knows? I thought I was safe. I was like, oh, robots don't have childhood trauma. Yeah.
All right, well, I'll do the thank you. Unless there's anything else that I haven't talked about that.
I don't think so. I think we got it.
Okay,
This
cool.
was a great conversation. Thank you for being my first official podcast interview. I was delighted to speak with you.
Awesome. Wait, first you for the book, or
For this book,
yeah,
not my
okay.
first podcast ever.
Okay,
But the first official podcast interview for Night's Edge has been
cool.
you.
I feel like that's probably going to be a trend for me, because I try to talk to authors early,
Yeah.
because I want to do pre-publication stuff. So um, maybe I'll refine a way to kind of help authors in the prep process of being able to talk about it. So
That's
whatever,
great.
we'll figure it
Yeah.
out.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Okay.
thanks so much. It was a great conversation. I'm always a little nervous when I've never spoken to a person before and it's kind of brand new. And this was the first thing I read from you. So you made it very easy, and I appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You made it super easy for me too. That's great.